Hello and welcome to episode 69 of SEO Is Not That Hard. I'm your host, Ed Dawson, the founder of keywordspeopleuse.com, the solution to finding the questions people ask online. I'm an affiliate marketer, SEO, and I've been building and monetizing websites for over 20 years. I've built sites from the ground up, bought sites and sold sites in large exits. I'm here to share with you the SEO knowledge, hints and tips I've built up over the years. Today I'm going to talk about how getting hit with a Google penalty can affect your traffic. Today's podcast is inspired by a Twitter thread that I've been involved with last week with Carl Broadbent. Now, I've mentioned Carl Broadbent before on the podcast in the episode where I talk about which podcasts I listen to, and Carl's podcast is one that I do listen to. Carl, if you don't know him, he's a UK-based content publisher, affiliate, and he has in the travel space, and he got quite badly hit by the helpful content update and has lost about 80% of his traffic. Now, he recently did a podcast where he suggests that he feels like he's been throttled by Google, that Google have set a limit on the number of visits that his site can receive per day, because he's been within sort of 10 or 20 visitors a day. It's been very constant, the number he gets. It might be 100 or 200 visitors. I don't know the exact number. I think he might have mentioned it in his podcast. I will put a link to both his podcast and the Twitter thread in the show notes, so you can go back and look at both of those. So Carl went out onto Twitter and said, I feel like I've got this throttling that's happened to me, and I'm being limited in the amount of visits I can get a day. Does anybody else feel like this? And there's quite a few people popped up and said, similar stories. They're getting very similar amounts of traffic every day. They got hit by the helpful content update, and now they're getting very similar levels every day, almost as if Google is saying you can have X number of visitors a day, and then we're going to turn your traffic off. Now, I can see completely why it might feel like that. I mean, I've spoken before in the podcast about times we've been hit on our sites with Google penalties and Google updates in the past, particularly around things like the Panda updates and the Penguin updates back in the sort of early 2010, 2013 time, that kind of period. Now, yes, seeing those huge traffic drops does feel like you've been picked on personally, but you haven't, unless you've had a manual action, which can happen. Google can actually pick on people personally, and that's when they give you a manual action, and that's when it will show in your search console that you've had a manual action. But most, or 99.9% of people who get hit by Google, it's an algorithmic update, and an algorithmic penalty. So the HCU, helpful content update, is algorithmic. Now, obviously, what happens when you get hit by these is your rankings get dropped massively. So you might be we've gone from ranking really well, like we went from ranking number 1 for the term broadband to ranking 999. I think we just got a very last page. If you went all the way down to like the 1,000 results, we went overnight. And obviously, that has a massive impact on your traffic, and you'll see a big, huge drop. But when these things happen, you'll still probably get a little bit of traffic from Google. There'll still be the odd term that, even if you've been hit by a penalty for, that you're going to rank for. And this happened with us when we had Penguin. There's still the odd term we still ranked okay for, but it brought very little traffic. And it did look like you were kind of throttled. It looked like, we're going to get 100 visits a day or something, and it's like that all the time. But that's just because that's the natural level of traffic on those 1 or 2 terms that you're still ranking for. And those terms tend not to be ones that are very competitive. They're not ones that tend to drive huge amounts of traffic or fluctuate much with sort of seasonal effects. So it looks very much like, I'm getting 100 a day and that's it, or whatever the amount is a day and that's it. But if you go and delve down and look at it, and look at the times of day your traffic's coming, you'll see that if it was just saying you can have 100 and then stop, you would see all your traffic coming at the first part of the day, and then it would stop. That's a throttle. The throttle is you have a hard limit per day, and then it all ceases. And that's not what happens with these things when you get hit by an algorithm. What you're actually seeing is a different effect. It's not a throttle. They haven't set a specific amount per day for your site, what they've done is they've just dropped your rankings, they've depressed your rankings, they've put like a negative classifier against your site and your content, so that instead of ranking where you would have done before, this new classifier says you've hit this helpful content update classifier, so we're going to apply a minus whatever penalty. So this isn't necessarily going to be a minus so many places, it will be a minus on the, because essentially every website, every web page in Google will have a certain score for every query. So if your page comes up as being one of the potentials for results for a query, you'll get scored, and then they'll literally will score it on that number. It will be decide how they place things in the rankings in the SERPs. And when you get hit by a classifier like this, it will literally take that score and then decrease it by a certain amount. It might be a physical number, it might be a percentage, but whatever they used to do, they will take that original ranking and then remove it down and suppress it. Now, that is how it drops your rankings, because you essentially just disappear as far as most people when they're searching. They just won't see you because you've been buried so deep. If you're on the first 1,000 results already, you might get pushed even further out than that. So while it feels like a throttle, it's not actually a throttle. They're not actually specifically deciding you can have X number of visits per day. They've just pushed you so far down the rankings that you're not getting any visits on most of the things you used to. But there'll be the odd anomaly, there'll be the odd page that still has got enough going for it that it still ranks enough to get a little bit of traffic, and it's just that amount of traffic that comes is really quite stable. You can get that kind of feeling that it's a throttle, but it's not a throttle. It's a dampening effect on all your rankings, and that's what causes the issue. Now, if you've been hit by the helpful content update, I truly understand your pain. I've been there, having been hit by Google updates, and know how devastating it can actually be and how it affects you at the time. Now, if you want to hear more about how we were affected, how we got out of it, and the sort of the story since, I would say go and listen to episode 5 of SEO is Not That Hard, and it's called The Story of Broadband.co.uk, and that covers how we started Broadband.co.uk, but then also the major event, which was when we got hit by the Google Panda and Penguin penalties, which meant that we had to, like you are now with helpful content update, you have to reevaluate how you create your site, how you create your content, how you put it all together to get out of the situation you're in. So that's a really good one. I'd suggest that anyone who wants to sort of hear a story of how it's overcome, go and listen to that one. Now, Google themselves have recently, their search liaison, Danny Sullivan, has actually posted some very interesting updates on how the helpful content update classifiers work. So I'll just go into that right now. I will post a link to this tweet that I'm going to talk about in the show notes. And this is a tweet last Friday, February the 9th, by Google Search Liaison, who's Danny Sullivan. And he says, the classifier is always running. If it sees a site is reduced unhelpful content, the site might start performing better at any time, i.e. maybe someone made a change to reduce this several months ago. The classifier is checking and basically says, oh, I kind of think this has been a long-term change. As the assessment shifts, it's not like you have to wait until the next time the classifier itself might get updated. We do update it from time to time to make it better, but sites that improve could see change independently of that. So what he's saying here is, basically, you haven't got to wait till the next helpful content update is run to see an improvement, because this is how previously, say, when it was Penguin that hit sites, you could do all the work to get links removed and things like that, but it wouldn't be until it ran again that you would see any positive effect of the changes you'd made. And this happens on a few things. I think a few updates, sometimes they just run once, and then no matter what you do, you're not going to see any changes until they run that update again. Whereas here, Danny's saying that, they're constantly evaluating sites against the helpful content classifier. And if they see that you've made changes, that now means your content is helpful, they will potentially start raising you in the rankings. But the one qualifier that he puts in there is that they want to see these changes stay for the long term. Now, he doesn't specify how long the long term is. It could be weeks, could be months. I suspect it's probably months. But what they're saying is, if you make these changes and then they stay, then we'll start to raise you up. And I think this is because they don't want people to probably be able to experiment to see how far they can push it. They probably don't want people to be able to make a change to be helpful again and then put lots of unhelpful stuff back in and try and bounce up and down the rankings. I think they want to see it as a long-term thing, which I admit is frustrating because it's going to be very hard to know what changes you've made actually have any kind of effect. Now, as we're not seeing anyone as yet say they've recovered from the helpful content update, or very few, if there are any, there's not a lot because there's not a lot of noise about it, then I would suspect that whatever the period of time is, it's going to be in the months period. But you will start to see if people recover from this eventually. Like with all updates I've ever seen, there's very few updates, I think, where people have never been able to recover. Some people give up and don't recover. That's a different matter. But every major change that Google's ever made that I've seen in my experience, there's always been ways for sites to get out of it, given enough changes and enough time. So while I admit I understand how frustrating it is at the moment if you've been hit by this helpful content update, I think there is light starting to appear at the end of the tunnel. And I think especially Danny on Search Liaison at Google is trying to get more information out there to people, and I think he's pushing the cause because I think of all the people at Google, he does seem to understand that. I think he understands that they've gone too far really on this. So I think just want to say there is still hope there. But back to the original point of this podcast. Have you been hit by a throttle on your site if you've been hit by the helpful content update or any other Google update? No, it's not a throttle. It's just that your rankings have been pushed so far down that it feels like that, but it's not a conspiracy against you that says you're only allowed X number per day. That's just the number that it's ended up at because of how far down your rankings have been pushed. Thanks for being a listener. I really appreciate it. Please subscribe and share. It really helps. SEO is Not That Hard is brought to you by keywordspeopleuse.com, the solution to finding the questions people ask online. See why thousands of people use us every day. Try it today for free at keywordspeopleuse.com. If you want to get in touch, have any questions, I'd love to hear from you. I'm at Channel 5 on Twitter, or you can email me at podcast@keywordspeopleuse.com. Bye for now, and see you in the next episode of SEO is Not That Hard.